Folks, I have with us a candidate for South Carolina 6th District. He's challenging Representative Jim Clyburn, South Carolina's own Marcel Dixon. Give it up for Marcel.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent, my brother, excellent. Now, I want to give a full disclosure, Marcel, my brother. I read your website. And first of all,
Okay.
whoever wrote your about, did you write that?
I wrote everything on there.
Bruh. You gotta look. If you decide you want to go into like doing this media thing, holler at me, brother, because I love what you put together in your about. It is moving. It is relevant. It's eloquent. It's touching. It's all those things, my brother. And if you don't mind, I'd love to start there. I want to give people a picture of who Marcel Dixon is, because you talk about Ridgeland, Georgia, and growing up in a large family, my brother.
Right. It's originally in South Carolina, but I'm right on the border with Savannah, Georgia. And I want to say I'm going to take you up on that offer. So don't, I'm not shy about taking people up on their offers. But yeah, I'm still living in the town where I was raised. It's a very small town. It's a materially poor town, but it's culturally rich. And I'm very proud of where I'm from and where I currently live, even though it has a lot of issues. As I made clear in my biography, none of those issues are caused by the people here. They've been caused by the issues that I am running to get rid of, that I'm running to change.
I love the way you frame that. That is a preferred way to frame it, as opposed to when both aware. I'm sure you're aware of how some folks tend to not understand that they put the cart before the horse, and they look at the effects instead of the causes. They look at the symptoms instead of the disease that we find ourselves in. So I appreciate you framing that as in we're put in this environment. You talked about your great grandfather and your grandfather and their World War I and II status. Could you do you mind talking about that and some things that did not happen for them that may have created this situation?
So my great grandfather, Powell Dixon, Gregg Marcel Dixon, so I have his last name. He was a World War I veteran. And we all know what happened at the end of World War I. It was first called the Great War because the world had never seen anything like it. And it was a time where the continent of Europe was collapsing. And talk about the bitter irony. Who do they send over there to help defend liberty? Black Americans, and I'm going to refer to them as freedmen because on the congressional record, those of us who are descendants of the people who were enslaved and who earned and fought for their emancipation at the end of the Civil War, we are congressionally referred to as freedmen. So sometimes I would say Black Americans, sometimes I would say freedmen, just for context. They sent Black Americans over to Europe to help defend and protect and sustain liberty. We've done the same thing here. And yet, when that war ended in 1919, that was the same year of Red Summer, when this country saw tens upon tens of racial massacres against those very same Black Americans, like my great grandfather. My great grandfather died in the 1970s. He was born, I did not have his birthday on hand, either right at the turn of the century in the early 1900s or in the 1800s. He raised my father. My father's parents, my grandmother, she was severely addicted to drugs. And my father's father, my grandfather, he didn't have a relationship with my father at the time. What happened to my father's grandparents, my great grandparents on his side? I do not know about my great grandmother, but my great grandfather, who's a World War II veteran, Lewis Mitchell Jr., who is still very, very much alive, he was in New York City. He left from this part here, South Carolina, the Low Country, which is the home to us Sea Island Creoles, or we are better known as the Gullah Geechee, the descendants of the rice-growing Africans from the Kingdom of Congo, southern Nigeria, and the Senegambia region, which is Senegal, Gambia, and parts of Mali. He left from this area because of the heartbreaking poverty that was here. But my father was not with him. So my father grew up in this heartbreaking poverty. And even though there were not many opportunities here, there was at the hands of the US government, because that is the accusation in a country that has done experiments on us, from the Tuskegee experiment to radiation experiments to the guy, the founder of gynecology. You can believe that it's not too far-fetched to believe that the CIA was allowing drugs to proliferate our communities at the very least, if they were not putting it in themselves. So drugs were here, even though there were not opportunities. So his mother, my grandmother, my dear grandmother, who eventually defeated her addiction, was severely addicted to drugs, and he had to grow up with my great grandparents, Powell and Irene Dixon, and they didn't have air conditioning in an area where during the spring and summer, sometimes all year, we easily go into the 90s, 100s. The humidity is oppressive. They didn't have a telephone. They didn't have a car. They didn't even have a television for a long period of time. When they finally did get one, it was a black and white television. So they made sure he was well fed, but as far as his other needs, they were from a generation, several generations removed from him. So the poverty was what he inherited from them. They didn't get what white veterans have received, which was the GI Bill. White veterans of World War II, by and large, 14 million of them, received billions and billions and billions of dollars that allowed them to go to college. Matter of fact, they said it spurred the white middle class. It gave them guaranteed low interest home loans, business loans. They got pensions. They got access to health care. Those were things that Black American veterans were largely excluded from, including my great-grandfather, Lewis Mitchell, who is still alive and still remembers that time period very well.
I think that's so important to state that. That is such information that is kept from the masses. Most people don't know this. I posted about this, Marcel, a couple months ago on Facebook in a live stream. I was running down, it's a book by Sean Rochester, who's a financial whiz. It's called The Black Tax. Very short book, very quick read for anyone out there. And he goes down a list of the 2% things. It's called the 2%. And he makes a list of issues that Black Americans are 2%, we fall into 2%, such as we only receive 2%, less than 2% of the GI Bill. We only receive less than 2% of the GI Bill. Now, most of the people on Facebook, I got some conservative people on Facebook that follow because I am critical of Democrats. So they love that.
Yes.
But look, they don't like that I'm critical of also Republicans. So then they get, they angry then. Like, oh,
so they love it when I say I called the Democrats and I'm running as a Democrat, but because they have not served as Democrats, because if they were serving as Democrats, they would be looking out for the needs of their most loyal voting base. Since the 1960s, 60 years, Black Americans have voted over 90% for the Democrats. Yet we have the least amount of wealth. We have the lowest incomes. We've lost 80% of our land, went from owning 15 million acres of property at the end of the 1950s to now just owning 1 million acres, and we're fighting to hold on to that. Black men have the shortest lives, and yet if people want to see what the quintessential Democratic voter, how they appear, it will be a face that looks like your face and my face. So the Democrats have failed to serve their most loyal constituents. So I call them the Democrats. However, I also call the Republicans the Republicans. And you're right. The Republicans who are my fans, all of a sudden, not my fans so often any longer. So I get what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm about to write down those buzzwords. That's good. Now, there's another issue. There's another issue. When you talked about the benefits, See, we're gonna get into this when we get to the reparations portion, because we all
Right.
know that's what people want to hear. But I want to, before we get to that, you talked about your issues going to school, folks. Marcel talks about being bullied, some emotional and abuse that he suffered growing up. Marcel, do you mind talking about that, sharing with people what some of your struggles were and how you were able to get help for that?
So the school that I attended, Jasper County School District, I'm I hate saying this sometimes because people will want to criticize the teachers. It's not the teachers' fault. Not all of the teachers' faults, I should say. Most of the teachers, they are hardworking and they have been shouldered with solving the issues of the community, and the issues of the community are reflections of the issues of society, and the issues of society are a direct result of the issues of government sanctioned anti-blackness, the poverty, the mental emotional illness. Those are things that they put on the shoulders of underpaid, underappreciated, hardworking teachers. So I want to preface my statements with that. But my district is the lowest performing district in the state of South Carolina. And South Carolina is one of the lowest performing states. It usually hovers around the 48th to the 49th state when it comes to educational performance and proficiency overall. So you can imagine the stats for my district. So I want to say that it's also an area, a region in my state referred to as the corridor of shame. And it refers to districts and counties, rural majority Black counties along South Carolina's I-95 corridor from the northern part of the state, usually starting around Florence, down to my state, which is the furthest south by the Georgia border with Savannah, Jasper County. And I used to hate that. I used to feel like it was an insult to me, to my people.
Yes.
Corridor of shame, not shame, but now I embrace that term because it should be called the corridor of shame. But like I say on my website, the shame belongs to all of the elected leaders that have allowed this poverty and this legacy of anti-Blackness to persist. So obviously, we are in a community that has inherited poverty. And I say to white Americans, the same way a lot of white Americans have inherited land from their grandparents and great-grandparents, and they get inherited cars, inherited businesses from their great-grandparents from the 1700s, 1800s. Black Americans inherited the poverty and the trauma from our grandparents and great-grandparents. So in a community that's impoverished, that's extremely rural, so we don't have access to health care, we don't have access to recreational opportunities. Parents have to commute long hours like my mother and father did. They don't have a lot of time with their parents because their parents have to work. The wages are very suppressed. They're very low, so parents have to work long hours. It's not too surprising to realize that children are going to have issues. I'm not excusing the people that bullied me. I will never excuse them because I still have not forgiven them. I'm not the forgive and forget type. So sorry, not sorry. But I'm just saying it was bound to happen. So in school, I went through a lot of horrific things. Elementary was fine. But in middle school, it literally changed my life, and not for the better. Because my personality in my area at least was, I would say, different from a lot of the boys in my area, at least from my perception. I obviously stood out and I was signaled out. And it wasn't the majority of kids. I want to make that very clear. The majority of kids never molested me, never bothered me at all. But the ones that did horrific things. I remember being burned with kids who would heat up clothespin with lighters and burn me with it. I remember I went to use the restroom and all of the urinals were being used. So I went in the stall and they took the doors off the stalls because of, I guess, inappropriate behavior was happening. So the restrooms had no doors, the stalls had no doors. So I went to use the restroom in the stall, and one of the people, that boys that were bullying me, was using it. I didn't know. So he slapped me like hard. So I know I've always been opinionated. I've always been a very opinionated person. But at that time, I had a very gentle personality. So people will say, why didn't you fight back? not everyone has that type of personality. So I did what I was told to do. I told the teacher. She did absolutely nothing. I mean, one time that same kid spat on me. Like literally, a spit was draining down my face. Teachers were right there, did nothing. And for people who think that's just typical bullying, just a rite of passage, no. Because one time I remember waiting outside the office and I was waiting for my mother, whomever, to come pick me up. And that same boy pushed me up against the wall and was rubbing his genitals against me. Again, adults were right there. So I am a teacher now, and I'm my kids have freedoms. I'm not a person who believes that kids need to sit in their seat and stare at the board all day. No, I believe the classroom should reflect office, a business office. There should be a lot of activity. It should be a controlled chaos, but you have to have boundaries, because if you don't have boundaries, controlled chaos quickly becomes chaos. And when you have chaos, what will happen to children is what happened to me. But the reason I feel that I am such a strict teacher is because I refuse to let what happened to me happen to any other child, because every single time that something was being done to me of that nature, for being locked in locker rooms, adults were right there and let it happen. So even though I still have not forgiven the two that did it, and by the way, both of them are in prison and will be there for the rest of their lives, not shocked, and to me it's well deserved. I have not forgiven them, and I'm not interested in forgiving them. I also have not forgiven the adults who were right there and allowed it to happen. But I compare that to the gentleman, and I'm only going to say his name this one time, James Clyburn, against whom I'm running against. I compare him, I draw a line from the teachers who sat there and watched me get assaulted, because it was more than bullying. It was literally sexual harassment, from being called a faggot because I just walked a certain way according to them. I was just breathing, and because I breathe differently, apparently I deserve to be called out my name. From being physically assaulted, sexually assaulted. They sat back and watched it happen. They may not have caused it, but they allowed it. So the responsibility is on them. My district is the sixth poorest district in the United States of America. Out of 435 districts, we are almost the poorest district in the county. For children, we are the third poorest district in the county. And the majority of children in my district look like you, and they look like me. So that means my district is almost the poorest place to live in America. This is after my opponent, who has been serving for 30 years, has been in power, and it's called the Kingmaker. But the same way those adults sat back and allowed me to be treated in such a way, and it has damaged me, even though I've overcome it, he has sat back and allowed this district, filled with a lot of people who look like you and I, to fall further and further and further to the bottom. And he's done nothing for people who look like you and I, but he's done a whole lot for people who don't look like us. And that is wrong.
Wow. Wow. Hold on a second. Hold on a second, because I can't follow that without doing some without talking a little bit about how you overcame this, because that is, we're leaving people with so much there.
I'm still overcoming it. Every day is a struggle. I mentioned on my biography that I suffer from clinical depression. You know what? The media has done a terrible job of, first of all, portraying depression. You think depression was to be a sad, rich white woman in her mansion with the dog and the Labrador Retriever, and the husband and the son are wearing their white linen shirts and shorts and throwing the frisbee. The dog was running after it, and the white woman sitting there sad. No, depression is not just a disease that affects white women or white men, who we think are the only people that kill themselves. It affects Black people too. But in this country, Black people, especially Black men, we're never shown as being in pain. We're never shown as being physical pain. We're never shown as being mental and emotional agony. So even the thought of us being the recipients of sympathy is something that's alien to people. And yet, what men in this country has overcome and been through as much as the Black man? None. And no other woman as much as the Black woman. So every day is a struggle for me. So my depression, I remember, it's like, I remember being, and I'm trying not to get too emotional about this. I remember being a carefree kid at one point, like I mentioned in my biography. I remember just being able to enjoy my rich culture, which is unique, my Gullah Geechee culture. You don't find this culture anywhere else in the world. It's only here in the coastal parts of South Carolina first, then Georgia, and then northern Florida and North Carolina too, so they won't be mad. A little tiny bit of North Carolina. North Carolina, it wasn't for Nina Simone, y'all be bad with me, but y'all lucky Nina Simone. I love Nina Simone, so I gotta give North Carolina some respect. So I remember that. It was like after middle school, and after during that time, my mother was not having it. But I don't remember much about my father being there to defend me. Matter of fact, I remember one time my mother called him and said, hey, they are putting their hands on our child. They're treating our child wrong. No, that ain't gonna happen. And my father had a talk with me. What's the type of talk you're thinking? And he asked me, he said, well, let me ask you a question. He said, do your brothers act like that? And I didn't know to what he was referring, but I knew. And I don't know what that meant, but I just knew it wasn't good. But I did know what it meant, if you get what I'm saying. And I was like, no. Then he went down the line. He mentioned my cousin Lamar, my cousin Devin, my cousin Eli, my cousins Jason, my cousin Terry. He went down the line, me and my cousins, asking me if they act like me. He was like, well, that's the reason why kids pick on you, because you act like you confused. And the next day, I had a conference with the principal, and he was not there. He didn't even bother to show up, as if I wasn't worth defending. So I remember my mother looking and seeing like, is he coming? I remember her looking at her phone, looking out. And I was like, Mom, what you looking for? And she was like, oh, nothing. But I knew what she was looking for. She was looking for him. And he never showed up, as if I was not even worth protecting. So I'm still trying to overcome it. And I remember after that night, I was never able to look in the mirror again and say, you okay. You are just fine the way you are. My mother used to tell me, look in the mirror and say good things about yourself. I couldn't do it. I still struggle to do it because I can't believe it. But finally, after I went to Atlanta and I was away from my community, because I thought if I got away from the bully, that things would get better. No. When I was here, I had my cousins. I never knew what loneliness was. Even if I was fighting with them, my cousins were there. I had a support system. I had my great grand aunts, my Aunt Rena, telling me stories about Root. For those who don't know, Root is South Carolina voodoo, or we call it hoodoo. Hoodoo, people think means just Black American folk magic. Hoodoo is originally meant Gullah voodoo or root. Hoodoo is a Gullah Geechee word meaning luck, usually bad luck. But now it's used throughout the nation. But my Aunt Rita would tell us stories about that. It was scared. Or my Aunt Nancy feeding her chickens, or just sitting on the porch, smiling when I would say good morning to her. And of course, my great grandmother Nana. But when I was with my aunt and my cousin, I didn't have that. You know how to say you don't miss what you got until it's gone?
Yes.
Well, I was so lonely. I said I was going to kill myself. The teachers at the school where I was attending then called my mother. And it was like, ever since then, depression has been, ironically, even when I felt lonely, depression has always been there. So in a way, it's been one of the main mainstays of my life. But in my mid-20s, I finally went to go see a counselor. I would go to the school counselor every now and then, or teachers would send me there. But I finally went to go to a counselor, and they did a type of treatment. I always get the letters mixed up. EMDR. Eye rapid movement. I'll have to look it up for you, but it's called EMDR, EDMR, and it's where they they process they do something with your eye movements. It's not hypnosis, but people will probably, that's the best reference I have, and it helps you deal with traumatic memories, troubling thoughts. And let me tell you, that was the best thing. It got so good that I stopped going to my sessions, and
Wow.
they released me as a patient, as a client, and I was good. And then, unfortunately, started struggling again. And now I've been going to a counselor regularly, uninterrupted since 2017. It's been the best thing I can do, and that's one of the reasons why health care. You know, I'm all for reparations, but on my website, I do mention that I feel healthcare should be for everyone. Black American, white American, blue American. No one should get sick and be in pain and have to worry about if they can go and get health care because they can't afford it. I had a friend one time who asked me to lend him some money because he had been to every hospital in Savannah. He came over to the South Carolina side. We are a rural area. We don't have many hospitals on this side. So the one hospital we had, he had been here too. So he had to pay a balance. And I had to scrape a change to pay a balance for him so he can get some of his teeth taken out because he was about to get an infection that was going to go to his brain. That's how long he was suffering in pain. Yes. So this is one of the reasons why, and among others, I'm so big about healthcare.
Well, Marcel, you are a champion, brother, and what you've been through, it's not, it's serious, it's damaging. You are not alone, though, and a lot of other people watching this show have been through tremendous things. I've been through some things myself. I know exactly what you mean about depression. Losing. Even recently, you think you get past something, and then something happens, and it throws you back. I recently lost my dad like almost a year ago, and I thought we was the closest person that I've ever lost. And up till him, I thought I was good. I thought I had maintained. I'd been out of this depressive state hadn't seen it in years. But that threw me back, brother. I tell you, that threw me back. And then the COVID exasperated it because we couldn't visit him like we wanted to. We couldn't all be present in the room with him, and it was just difficult. But I just want to.
I give you my condolences. I lost my great grandmother, my nana, who I mentioned. I had several nanas, but Nana Justine was the nana that was with us. Like my mother, grandmother, Nana. My great grandmother, she was like the matriarch. She lived to be 101. She died in 2015 when I was 31. She had gone through a lot in her life. Like I mentioned in my biography, my family was a family of generosity, of love, of warmth, and kindness. But there was pain there that they never dealt with. Yes. My father, I want to defend him because I know people maybe think, what type of father would say it to his kid? And this stuff is really hard for me to mention, but I mention it. My mother was like, why are you telling everybody your business? My mother used to say, you keep what happens in this room, in this room. I said, Mommy, that's the problem now with us. That's the problem now. I loved my grandmother to death, but some things we got wrong. Yeah. And yes, there are some things, there are time and places for things. But I said, keeping traumas with it. No, I'm not continuing that cycle. That's one of the reasons why I probably went through some things. My father never told me some things. So my father realized his errors, and now he's working to repair. He's always been a part of my life. He was never like an absentee father, but he wasn't always a positive influence. But I know why. My father, I finally told him about the damage he did to me, especially that particular night. How I literally felt something in me died and still has come back. And in this life, I don't think it will. No matter how much better I get. And he told me, and I never thought about this, outside of one photo where he's like a cameo, there are no pictures of him as a child. When he was born, there's no photos of him as a baby. There's no photo of anyone holding him. There's no photos of him at all. The only time you start seeing him in photos is when he met my mother when they were 16. Before then, it was like he didn't exist. And the reason he said why he didn't show up for me, he did not make excuses, but I feel it is an excuse because no one ever showed up for him. My great-great-grandparents, They were from another generation. They were born in here in this area of South Carolina when this area was still filled with nothing but rice plantations. It literally still looked like the Civil War had just ended. They grew up on a farm. They were agrarian people. They grew up growing rice and growing peanuts because those are some of the most important crops in South Carolina. They he was a kid born in the 1960s, became a teenager in the 70s. They had become teenagers in the 1930s. They were generations removed from him. So their attitude was, you got education, get your lesson, you're going to eat, we're going to give you clothes. It ain't going to be anything brand new. Some of their clothes, some of his clothes, they probably made.
Yes.
So they felt like long he was fed and had a bed to sleep in, he was good. But emotionally and socially, being that he was a kid living through the era of crack, the crack epidemic, and when our leaders were being assassinated, my great grandparents, no fault of their own, they were in their end of life years. They didn't know how to provide for him emotionally. So he told me he would get bullied. Matter of fact, he told me that he would go to an island right by me, Kalawasi Island, and some of the bus drivers will make him have to fight some white kids. He was getting bullied by a kid at school. My mother confirmed this, getting teased about the clothes he wore, getting teased about he dressed like an old man, and no one ever showed up for him. He didn't go to school. No one, his great grandparents, they just were not equipped in this new era to deal with it. So that's what I'm saying about trauma being passed down from one generation to the next. My father wasn't doing what he did out of malice. He was doing what was done to him.
Right.
And he was doing what he had not taught to do. Not saying my great grandparents weren't loving, but they just weren't equipped for the new type of needs, for the new type of necessities in this here environment. And that's why I push reparations so hard, because I've lived through the trauma personally and societally of trauma and pain being passed down.
Yes. Yes. And when we talk about reparations, looking at your website, I see your platform is very impressive. You have 4 cornerstones, better deal. Everything is better. A better deal, better transportation, better education, a better plan for thriving communities. Talk about what that better deal is. What does that better deal consist of?
Well, the reason I use better is I think about my mother. I talk about my father's trauma, and there are 2 responses people usually have to injustice, to trauma, to pain. Some people that it embittered them, as my father did, but he's working to overcome now. And some people that it softened them, like my mother did. My mother went through trauma as well. Now, even though she had my grandmother, who was a loving, sweet, kind-hearted woman, who I only had for 9 years, she let it soften her. My mother's father, too, it was my father's mother, but it was my mother's father, became severely addicted to heroin during the heroin epidemic. Now, you know how they don't ever want to talk about where the heroin came from. I guess we're supposed to believe that we as Black Americans, we have so much power, we can make, manufacture, ship things through ports. We're supposed to believe that, right? Okay, that's a whole other conversation. But my mother's father died when she was 6 of a heroin overdose. And my grand uncle was there when he died. He panicked when my grandfather overdosed and left from there. And later he became so addicted to drugs that my grandmother had to take care of him. So my grandmother was taking care of her brother, who was there and sort of left the love of her life to die on the ground. Could you imagine the emotional and mental minefields that existed? My father said, to this day, my mother mentions how not having her father still bothers her. She still has flashes of him. Like, she saw a picture of him the other day, and her and my uncle, it was almost like they didn't cry, but you could just tell they were grieving about what they did not have. But my grandmother, Rosetta Goodwin, she was pregnant with my youngest uncle, who unfortunately died shortly after returning from a stint in the military from a sudden heart attack. My mother always believed something happened when he was in the military that cost him, which is why she was always against us joining the military. But I was 2 when that happened. But my grandmother, my grandmother, She was pregnant in the 1960s with that uncle, and they gave her a blood transfusion. And it turned out they gave her a bad batch of blood, and she got a bad case of one of the hepatitis. I don't know which one, and it damaged her kidneys, and she had to go on dialysis, and it was downhill from there. She would pass out. I remember her being a kid. She would pass out, hit her head. One time she passed out and fell so bad she knocked some of her teeth out. A lovely, beautiful woman. But because of medical anti-blackness, till this day, Black women are still 5 times more likely to die giving birth to a child than a white woman. Black women are more likely to die than women in poorer nations like the Philippines giving birth to a child. But we don't talk about, as awful as that statistic is, we don't talk about the Black women that don't die, but they are irreparably harmed physically. My grandmother didn't die there on the spot, but she went through hell, and it eventually did kill her. That's what my mother went through. My mother mentioned going to school and always worrying about if she was going to get a call to the office saying your mother has passed away. So I feel a part of the depression and anxiety that I have. I feel like I inherited from my mother. I feel like physiologically speaking, she passed it on to me, and my father passed his issues on to me because he became addicted to drugs. You see what I'm saying about that trauma? So I was looking at my mother living in this poor area of South Carolina. Both my parents are Gullah Geechee descendants. I've done both of their ancestries back to the mid 1700s. Like, we can't get out of this Charleston, Beaufort, Georgetown, now Jasper, South Carolina. A little bit of Chatham County, which is Savannah, Georgia's county. But we're both here. And I remember thinking, my mother deserved better than this. She deserved better. She deserved to have had both her parents. My father deserved better, but it was my mother. So when I say better, I'm saying that we as Black Americans deserve better than all this stuff that's been done to us and that what we're getting now. But even people who are not Black Americans, who are in this district here in South Carolina, we deserve better than have a person who's worth millions, who's called the kingmaker, you know, all haughty and the kingmaker, who gets all this respect from people, but he's been in power for 30 years, and we are almost the poorest area in which to live in the United States of America. We have some of the worst performing schools in the entire country. South Carolina has one of the worst. I think it is the worst, but I'm going to refrain from saying it is definitively, but it's definitely one of the worst states to live in as far as life expectancy goes. It has some of the highest levels of gun violence. People here are some of the most obese and sickly people. And yet the person has in charge of my district has been in power for 30 years, and everyone respects him. They respect him so much that when he endorsed the current president we have, who's not trying to give $450,000 to us Black Americans who are to the bottom, we're even beneath people who have entered this country illegally and have just been in this country for a year. We've been here since at least the 1600s, 1500s, period. But this country's nation's founded in the 1600s. And we are to the bottom of people who just got here last year. But what is this current president doing? He was proposing to give $450,000 to people who illegally came in our country, committed a crime. But when asked about giving us, the descendants, the children of people who built this nation and then went through over 100 years of terrorism, from lynch mobs to our cities being burnt down to our children being cut out of our wooden stomach, he tells us that he supports it on camera, but behind the scenes tells the Democrats don't hope too much for that and says nothing about it. That is what this current representative for our district has done. He goes to Ohio because Nina Turner supposedly said something about him that he didn't like, and supports Chantel Brown, who says that when asked, how are you going to stop police brutality, she says just give officers mental health, because, you know, racism is anti-Blackness is apparently a mental issue. The officers are the one who needs to get health care. The people going through the violence, we don't need mental health. He supports her just because his feelings got hurt. So you so big, bad, and powerful, but your district is a mess. If you go call yourself the kingmaker, then your district needs to look like royalty. So when I say we need a better deal for Black America, I really don't like that title because that implies we had a deal to begin with. And the only deals we had have been bad deals. I'm saying that America needs to do for Black Americans what it should have done right at the end of the Civil War. They should have given our ancestors the wealth that they helped cultivate. They should have given us the land that we cultivated.
Absolutely.
They should have allowed the Freedmen's Bureau, whose job was it, to close all disparities between white Americans and Black Americans, to make sure that we got land, our 40 acres of the mule. They never got a chance to do that. The better deal is going to repair all of that and all the damage that has been done to us from mass incarceration, importation of drugs, Jim Crow, redlining, exclusion from voting. All of that is going to be included in my better deal and then some.
One of the things I noticed, and excellent discourse there, Marcel, man, very well said. One of the things I noticed is a lack of cohesion when it comes to these so-called progressives and a black agenda. And even though I consider myself progressive because the policies I believe in, that I support the most are progressive policies, I don't know if I quite fit into the framework. As I look at an article, this article was written back in 2020. This was back at a time when Joe Biden he had secured the nomination from the Democratic Party, but he hadn't won the presidency yet. And this is in The Guardian. And listen, now this is a culmination, it's a group article of several progressive organizations. The Alliance for Youth Action, If Not Now, Justice Democrats, March for Our Lives, Next Gen America, Student Action, Sunrise Movement, and United We Dream. So that's like 7 different progressive organizations. They talk about, the title of it is, Dear Joe Biden, here is how you earn our support. 7 organizations, all progressives, all say that they are not anti-Black, but not a single one of the things they were requesting from Joe Biden, you already know, had anything to do with Black people specifically. It's as if now they'll have immigration, they have health care, foreign policy, wealth tax, education, but nothing specifically for Black folks. As if we are the one group of people in America, as you pointed out, who are most supportive. I say if Black people did not vote Democrat, there would not be another Democratic president ever, because white people vote Republican. So as you look at it, as you entering this, and I know you're not you're doing this for various reasons. As you outlined, everything that you talked about, Marcel, is the reason. I was going to ask you why you running. I think you already answered that by telling us your life story and telling us the condition of the people in South Carolina in the 6th District. But as you listen to this, what do you say to those progressive organizations who can't I don't even think they used the word Black in this damn article, Marcel. Not one time there's the word Black. What's your take on their lack of representing for Black folks?
You're not progressive, you're regressives. And that's a tall order in the United States of America to regress. When I call you a regressive, that means that Black Americans who are in support of reparations, we are the true progressives. The pinnacle, the hallmark of a progressive in this country here is a person who supports reparations for Black Americans who are descendants of those who were enslaved by the American government. If you aren't supporting that and that's not your priority, you are not a progressive. I just had an organization that was supposed to help promote me here in my district drop me because I do not support illegal immigration, and I do not support legal immigration if it infringes upon the opportunities for Americans, especially Black Americans. They dropped me. My platform, Reparations for Black Americans, to undo all the harm that has been done to us, to do right by the group that still has yet to receive justice, that didn't matter to them. Their most important issues were abortion and immigration. They don't want to talk about how abortion has detrimentally affected the Black population. They just want to make sure we can still have it. You see what I'm saying? So you're not progressive if you're not in support of reparations. And I get so angry when I hear them talk about how progressive they are and how these other groups can get policies done for them, and how we seem it's like there's some unwritten rule that Black Americans can never get specific policies for us. They like to tell this lie. They like to do this bad faith argument. I think people call it gaslighting.
Yes.
They say, well, you can't do policies based on race. Okay, we ain't asking for policies based on race. First of all, I ain't asking you for nothing. I'm demanding you're going to do it. It's just a matter of how soon. You should have done a long time ago. But secondly, it's not about policies based on race. It's about policies based for the people of a certain lineage. When they did the reparations for the Japanese, they didn't say all Asian people. They didn't say all Japanese. They did it for the Japanese who went through internment during World War II. When they do these reparative policies and settlements for the Native Americans, they don't do it for all Native Americans. They do it for the Cherokee who went through this. They do it for the Apache who went through this. We are saying freedmen, the people who are descendants of the people who were emancipated at the end of the Civil War, we are the ones who went through slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and all other sorts of harms for which we never saw a dime, which we never even saw people brought to justice. You can do policies for the lineage of people who went through that. You are not a progressive. You are not pushing that. And stop calling yourself one. You're just as anti-Black as some of the far-right people about whom you think you're better than.
Yes. Yes. One more time. We got to clap for that. Now, on the abortion issue, I will say it gets a little nuanced because I do not want women resorting to self-abortions, which we know what that can lead to. But not being able to have a good faith conversation with you about it, and to dismiss you when you bring up the issue of how immigration impacts Black people, it's just clear to me that their focus is really not. It's just that your focus is Black. Your priority, you prioritize Black folks, and they had a problem with that. So that's probably why there's no good faith conversation around where you're coming from. So if they can't meet in the middle on these issues, I think that you're better off without them. But it is still unfortunate that if they were going to provide you with resources, that you won't have those resources. What do you do? What's the plan? Everyone's excited about your campaign. Everyone who follows news closely, that realizes that Representative Jim Clyburn is an impediment to progress, and they want to see some change. They're all concerned with how can we facilitate making sure we get him replaced, and what is your vision? How are you running this campaign in order to make that happen, Marcel?
You know, there's been some conversations by certain people who say they're in support of reparations, but their actions show completely different. But I'm not even going to give them the dignity of discussing them. But there's been a lot of conjecture about my campaign.
Yes.
About me needing to talk to people in my district. You know, like even look, I ain't the smartest guy in the world. If you open the dictionary, you saw a picture of a fool, you'll probably see a picture of me there, okay? But even I know that the people that matter ultimately the most are the people in my district who are going to vote for me. So I don't need anyone giving me bad advice at a job that I don't want and at a job at which they're doing badly, okay? I don't need them giving me bad advice. I am getting on the ground. But you see what these people don't appreciate? They don't appreciate people like you. They don't appreciate people like TD Hip Hop Media and all the other people of the new Black media. I appreciate y'all. I am more honored to be on your show. I would take 1,000 Tim Blacks than being on MSNBC or Full News or CNN, whatever they call themselves, crying Negro Network, whatever they want to call themselves. I'll take 1,000 of y'all because y'all are talking to the people. How many of those networks have people like me on their shows? How many of those networks gonna let someone like me come and talk about issues that impact us? So when I talk to y'all, I'm not so dumb to think that the people who don't live in South Carolina, just people who give me hand clap emojis in the comments is gonna be enough. But I'm connecting to people in my district because my district is a large district. South Carolina is a small state, but my district is a large district. It's 97% rural. People say go from door to door. It just goes to show the political ignorance of some of these people who think they're giving me advice. Because everyone knows, and I've spoken to a lot of people who do political organizing, door to door in a rural area, if you don't have a large team, you're going to waste the majority of time. You're going to be in a car most of the time, and you're going to be the other half of the time getting bogged down these little country roads. Trust me, I've lived in a rural area all my life. Anybody can tell me how it goes here. So this is a way I speak to people in my district, but I'm going to be a national candidate. So I need to talk, and my policy is going to have national impact. And I'm running, like my logo says, to repair Black America, first and foremost, to repair America. So all of my freedmen, my Black American brothers and sisters matter to me. I want to talk to all of them. So I've been doing this. I show up and speak to people on the ground. I speak to a lot of people on the phone. That's the majority of the way I've been reaching people. I've been calling hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of South Carolinians, and I'm about to call hundreds of thousands more very soon. I'm working on that with the South Carolina Democratic Party. I've been in contact with the Democratic Party county offices throughout my district. I've told them, I said, let me tell you something. For people who think they're so politically astute, it is the candidate's responsibility to engage their constituent, but it's also the county offices of the party for which those constituents vote. So the Democratic Party county offices in my area, they have a responsibility too to let people in those counties know, hey, this guy is running as a Democrat. He wants to represent you. Y'all have a right to know him. You have a right to question him, and we're going to arrange it. So I've been working with them on doing that as well. So I am not denying any opportunity to engage with my constituents in my district, but also my Black American brothers and sisters outside of my district. And that is as much as I can give without divulging my entire strategy, because you know who is going to have people watching this, and he's going to be watching himself fuming smoke out of his nostrils.
Well, look, I accept that, and thank you, excuse me, for the info you could give us. Wow. I saw you. I'm sorry.
May I say something else real quick?
Sure, please.
I want to hit back at, because I've been hearing a few, it's mainly been a few guys. You know, it's always these beat themselves on the chest, smartest man in the room type guys who are telling me things about having a team, and do you have a team, and do you have this, and do you have that?
We lost your audio. I mean your video, Marcel.
I'm sorry. I'm in you know whose district, so the internet here is horrific. So
no problem.
Sometimes you turn the internet on and the light goes out. So but okay. I want to say to some of these people, who've been talking about, you know, do I have a team? Do I have this? Do I have this? And one of them even called himself going on a little show and pulling up you know whose numbers, talking about how powerful he is. Now, ain't that something? This guy is literally watching our people die. North Charleston has toxic soil, water, and air from a plant that exploded in the mid-90s. And then again, in the early 2000s, I was alive when both of them happened. It even impacted my area an hour away. And they talk about this guy being so dangerous to us as Black Americans, which I agree with. But the more somebody stands up and challenges them, they start peeing their pants talking about how powerful he is. I want to respond to them real quick. First of all, we are freedmen. We're Black Americans, okay? When have we ever had as many resources as the people, the system against which we're running? When Harriet Tubman did the Underground Railroad, did she go back with an army, or was she by herself? She was by herself. Her husband thought she was going to die. He said, "You are crazy. You're going to die." To the point that he went and got another woman. She came back and found her husband had taken another woman, but she proved them wrong. We have proved this system wrong every single time they've told us we weren't going to be able to do something, or they thought we were crazy for trying to do something. And we've always done it having far less or not having all that we should have had, because we don't have all that we should have had now. So for these people to want to say, because they don't think, because they don't know what I have, first of all, but they don't think because I have this or I have that. Are you really about that life? Or are you scared? If you're scared, say you scared. That's why you ain't doing the job. That's why I'm the one doing it, okay? If you scared, say you scared. But I am my ancestors' descendants. Maybe they need to go buy one of those shirts to say I'm not my ancestors, because in their case, it's true. And second of all, last but not least, I want to say, don't say a word about my campaign, about what I got and don't got. If you really care about reparations, if you really care about getting rid of and getting a true reparations in the seat of this person that everyone acknowledges is a true harm to Black America, you will start talking about what I have and don't have, what you don't even know, and you'll start donating and come be a part of the team that I have.
There you go.
I just want to say that to those out there.
Yes, be a part of. If you say that Marcel's missing
That's right.
pieces, be those pieces. Volunteer.
Right. And if you can't do that, then don't be talking about what I have and don't have.
That's the defeatist.
Really care.
Defeatist attitude never solves.
Right. To say, "Oh, look, I told you so," than to get over here or help get this person out of office and replace them with a true reparationist who you know is going to fight to get it done.
Any attention that's shed on what's going on in Congress as it pertains to ignoring the benign neglect that's been laid upon Black people is a positive. Any attention, my attention, people say it to me too, Marcel, you just talking, Tim, what you doing? All you do is talking. I'm talking about issues. I'm feeding the need of knowledge and information so that people are aware. You don't realize how important that is. I get letters from people all over the country. Cover this, cover that. Publicity is important. It is not everything, but it is something. So people need to understand that this is a process. This is a process. And Marcel deserves our support, not just our criticism. Don't think just criticizing someone is actually supporting someone.
Hey, may I say something?
Please.
I'm okay with criticism. When I go on interviews, I say to all of y'all, give me those tough questions. I don't hide from tough questions. People always then say to me, "Well, I ain't nothing to ask you because you just so upright and out with everything." But I always tell people, I don't duck tough questions. But if you're going to criticize what I'm doing to replace a person who just wrote a reparations bill for the Catawba Native Americans, this person, the first bill this person wrote, my opponent, in 1993, he wrote a bill, and the language literally says to provide special protections, rights, and privileges for the Catawba Native Americans to address historical wrong. And then just a few months ago, he introduced a bill for these people to get land, saying that this was to address historical wrongs. Now, keep in mind, the Catawba Native Americans used to enslave people that look like you and look like me. Not only did they used to enslave us, they used to hunt us down because they knew the swampy subtropical terrain here in the low country of South Carolina. And yet this person, not only does he write a reparations bill for them, guess what he names the bill? He names the bill H.R. 1619. Now, Hannah Nicole Jones, who did the 1619 project that talks about our Black American experience, all we have overcome and how we are owed reparations, she must be livid right now. He takes our date and gives it to a group of Native Americans that used to enslave us. And then he brags about it on Twitter, saying this is the right thing, addressing historical wrongs. Yet he has the Gullah Geechee. Hello, we have lived here. We've had thousands of our oceanfront rice growing property stolen. We've lost millions upon millions of dollars. We were the people who grew the rice. Before cotton was king, it was rice that had the crown. We were the first, we made the first source of wealth for this country, indigo and rice. And now we are in the poorest, among the poorest district in this country. And he's written nothing for us. And nor has he said it's shown any interest in doing it.
We got to reach those voters and let them be aware. I was not aware of these bills, as you said.
Oh yes,
that's
exactly why I've been mentioning it to them.
That's a hypocrisy. That's a special blend of hypocrisy. I think that's a prime example of his lack of concern for black people, man. And it's sort of, I know you know Arami Osim Frimpong, the Irami, the funky academic, and he says, you know, one way to do well in America, the only way to do well in America is to do bad by black people. You got to be willing to throw black people under the bus. You got to be willing to ignore our issues, and that Clyburn definitely does that. He learned that early on. So I'm very glad you took time out to sit down with us. I know you talked about eminent domain. You kind of just touched on that. I did have a bullet point on that, on how members of your immediate extended family had to move because of eminent domain. They ran a highway through your homes.
Yes, they did. So my family, the town of Ridgeland, this is Bluffton, South Carolina is the next town over. It's one of the richest towns in South Carolina. It used to be just like Ridgeland, a poor, majority black town, but they ran all the Gullah Geechee people out like they did with Hilton Head Island, which is now a vacation destination for a lot of rich white people. But once upon a time, it was mainly Sea Island Creole people, like my people. My family was there. So Ridgeland, South Carolina, there's a neighborhood called Cherry Point, Pearlstein. That's where we were living, right on the border of Bluffton. And they widened the highway for developmental purposes. And my community, where all my great grand aunts and their children and their children, all my cousins I used to fight with, but we would fight in the daytime, and then at night we would do a low country boil. That's a Gullah Geechee stew of corn, potatoes, rice, sausage, and pour it out and we'll be crabs. And we'll be eating it and doing an oyster roast at night, and we'll just be laughing and telling stories. The older people, my great-grandmother or my great-grandmas be telling us stories. My mother will go over and talk to my cousins, and they'll be having a beer. That's gone now. I haven't seen some of those people in years, even though they're in this area. We're all scattered about. That's how the black community gets destroyed. So here's the thing, though. It's not okay. What was he used to say in that song? It's not okay. No, it's not right, but it's okay.
There it is.
Because I'm going to use that same eminent domain going through the Bureau of Land Management, because a lot of people don't know there is a Bureau of Land Management. That when I get my reparations bill passed, the first aspect of it I'm going to do is going to be land. And that Bureau of Land Management is going to use that same eminent domain to give every single descendant of freedmen an allotment of property, tax exempt, and throughout all 50 states, the same way Native Americans have their reservations throughout this country, Black Americans have built and defended this entire nation, whether it was a slave state or a free state. We are going to have federal property set aside for us that's going to have institutions, banks, schools, hospitals, post offices, just for us, and it's going to be done via eminent domain. If they could have done it to hurt us, they can do it to now repair the damage that was done to us. What's good for the goose is truly good for the gander.
Good for the gander. Good for the gander. Mr. Dixon, it's been a pleasure having you here, sir, especially today considering it is the actual birth date of Martin Luther King Jr. We talked about this before the show. It's amazing that was able to pull this off on this day. Things just fell this way. It's like it was meant to be, brother. Where do people go to find out more about your campaign and to get involved? Not just scream and shout from the cheap seats, but actually be a part of it and be constructive.
Well, first of all, my website is Marcel, and people spell it different ways. So I'm going to spell it M-A-R-C-E-L. M-A-R-C-E-L. That's my middle name. Gregg Marcel Dixon, but M-E-R-C-E-L. MarcelForCongress.com. That is my website. You can contact me via email, repairblackAmerica@Marcel for Congress. But you can also text me. And as I've been showing on my Twitter page, a lot of the people I call text me back, and I text them back right away. I'm not trying to be business as usual, because business as usual has ain't been working for Black Americans, as the data shows. So they can text me. I'll give out my number right now, especially if you are in South Carolina or you know people in South Carolina, whether they're in my district or not. If you are in South Carolina, know people in South Carolina, you can literally text me. You can call, but I'm probably not going to answer, but you can definitely text. You can text me at 843-940-8983. I'm going to give that out again. 843-940-8983. And if you are in South Carolina, or you are a South Carolinian who may not be living in South Carolina, but you have family and friends there, I definitely need and want to hear from you, because I work 60 hours a week, but I'm a teacher. So when I'm working for people like you to educate the next generation so they can help solve problems that afflict people like us, people like you. But I'm also running this campaign for people like you. So I definitely want to hear from you. And last but not least, especially for those people giving me so much advice about my campaign and what I need to do and telling me I should be afraid of Clyburn because he has so many numbers, you can donate, So marcelforcongress.com/donate. Y'all, listen, if I get just 50 people to subscribe to get me $50 a month, I can have just $2,500 a month. I know right now the naysayers and the defeatists and the cowards are saying, well, that ain't enough money. I don't need to match my opponent's money. You see, he's at the top of the ladder. But the thing is, when that ladder comes down, the ladder has been him stepping up on us and stepping on us. But see, that ladder's going to come down because we're standing up. And when that ladder's going to come down, he's going to fall. I don't need to get on top of the ladder. I'm not trying to step all over us. I don't need to get to where he is. I just need to get to y'all, to my voters in my district. So every penny helps. If I get just 50 people to give just $50 a month, that will be $2,500. And I can continue to play commercials in my district. I continue to call South Carolinians, to text, to email, to send them material electronically and in writing, because this person may not attack me. They might. That will be a good thing, actually, if they do. But they will flood the airwaves and send out printed material about how good of a representative they've been. And that is a lie, and I'm not going to let my people be lied to anymore.
There it is, guys. All the links will be included in the description box below, how to contact Marcel and be a part of his campaign. We even put that phone number up there. Marcel, I'll tell you, man, you're a bold brother, man. You got the energy and you got the spirit that we need to fight this good fight, brother. I look forward to helping you do it. Folks, go to Marcel's website. All that stuff's going to be below, marcelforcongress.com. Email him. And in closing, just to remind everybody, we got a little speech of MLK talking about what he wanted. He wanted them to cut the check. Let's play that and then we'll be out. Next. Come on now.
The Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white Americans And that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America
That's right, folks. Go to MarcelForCongress.com, MarcelForCongress.com, to support Marcel Dixon in his bid for South Carolina 6th District. Time to replace Clyburn. Be a part of it. Wolfpack, and remember, keep your cornbread. Cut the check, Johnsons. I love y'all. Happy MLK Day.